The automatic doors parted with a sigh, and a tall man in a gray t-shirt stepped into the fluorescent calm of the morning shift. He moved like a shadow, unremarkable, the kind of customer no one glances at twice. Yet the moment he crossed the threshold, he felt it, the brittle quiet that hangs in the air when something is wrong. At register 3, a young woman in a blue-trimmed polo swiped at her eyes, trying to look busy with the scanner while her shoulders trembled. The man slowed. The beep of the barcode reader sounded like a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. He was here to listen to his company breathe. What he heard was pain. Before we go further, if you believe small acts of compassion can change a life, pause for a second and support this journey. Please like, share, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe to Whispers of Kindness. Your words reach people you'll never meet, and your click might be the reason someone stays hopeful today. He took a spot near the greeting cards, pretending to read a joke about retirement. From there, he watched the cashier. Her name tag said Sarah. Her hair was tugged into a loose bun, as if put up in a rushing car mirror. She wore yellow cleaning gloves because the store had been short on the morning porter, and she'd stayed after her break to wipe counters as customers came and went. She must have thought the gloves made her look clumsy. He thought they made her look heroic, hands ready to serve despite whatever storm had swept through her night. She blinked hard and smiled at a customer who didn't smile back. He approached with a basket of small things, all chosen to buy him time. A box of tea, batteries, a jar of baby food he didn't need. Up close, her eyes were raw from salt. "Morning," she said, and her voice made a brave attempt not to shake. The scanner beeped again. The man, who was in truth the chief executive officer of the entire store chain, watched the way she checked dates on the baby, food, and straightened the label before bagging it. Care took time. And time was money, he knew. But care was also the only reason money ever came back. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. She nodded in the way people nod when they are falling apart, but don't have permission to crumble. "Yes, sir. Do you have our loyalty card?" Her hand slipped and sent the tea rolling. It thumped to the edge of the counter. She apologized 3 times for something that didn't matter, then asked if he wanted his receipt. He said yes because he wanted her to steady her hands on something that said, "Transaction complete." When he left, he took his change but not his curiosity. He found a seat in the small cafe nook by the windows and watched a world of small crises play out in fluorescent light. He'd come undercover because he'd stopped, trusting polished reports and carefully worded memos. Profits were up, turnover was manageable, customer satisfaction hovered in a safe range. But people do not live inside percentages. They live inside mornings like this one, where sleep was thin and a feverish child clung to a borrowed blanket in a neighbor's apartment because the mother had to choose between staying home and having the lights cut off at the end of the month. He didn't know that yet. He only knew he was needed. At 10, the assistant manager barked at Sarah, because the promo signage on aisle 7 hadn't been flipped yet. "We talked about urgency," he said. "I can't keep cleaning up after you." Sarah swallowed and said, "Yes, sir." The man in gray felt his jaw set. He'd met this type in every region, someone who thought leadership meant volume. The assistant manager walked away, and Sarah held herself very still, the way a person does when they're preventing their emotions from spilling in public. Then the phone at customer service rang, and something in her face broke when she heard the voice on the other end. "Is he breathing okay?" she whispered. She turned away, nodding repeatedly, and the man knew this call was not about coupons. She thanked the neighbor, placed the receiver back, and pressed her gloved hand against her eyes for 3 long seconds. Then she stepped to the register and smiled at the next customer. The man's heart cracked at the sight. Because resilience is graceful from far away and devastating up close, he circled the aisles, listening. A veteran at the deli shared that hours had been trimmed last month. The night stalker joked about sleeping in his car between shifts. A teenager at self-checkout confided to another that payroll had glitched and her overtime didn't post. The man kept notes on a folded receipt. Running his thumb over the embossed logo, he'd approved himself. He remembered thinking it made the brand feel warm. He wondered how warm a logo felt to a single mother with a past due notice in her purse. By lunch, he had seen enough to know a conversation couldn't wait. He returned to Sarah's lane when there was a lull and asked if she needed a break. She started to say she was fine, caught herself and said, "Maybe just a minute." In the tiny break room, a shoebox with a microwave and a Corkboard of schedules, he asked. Is there anything I can do? She stared at the floor as if the stain there could rescue her. I'm sorry, I shouldn't bring this to work, she said. My son has asthma. The neighbor called because his inhaler's almost out and the clinic won't give us a refill until I pay the balance. I'm trying to catch up, but rent went up and She stopped. Words were water and she was drowning. He could have given cash right then, but he had learned that charity patches a hole without fixing the boat. Thank you for telling me, he said. You shouldn't have to choose between being a good employee and a good mother. She gave a short laugh that wasn't laughter at all. I get written up if I'm late again. I can't afford to be written up. Her cheeks flushed. Please don't tell anyone I said that. I won't, he promised. But he would tell everyone what needed to be said. That evening, he called an unannounced meeting with the regional director, the store manager, and the assistant manager. He removed the baseball cap, put on his real name, and watched the color drain from their faces. The assistant manager tried to smile. We're honored, sir. The CEO, no longer in disguise, said quietly, I was here today. I listened. I watched. And I cried in the parking lot. The room fell into the kind of silence that acknowledges something sacred has been brought to the table, the truth. He laid out what he'd seen, not as accusations, but as artifacts. The trimmed hours that forced people to juggle double shifts at other jobs. The inflexible schedules that made parents choose between a doctor's appointment and a paycheck. The payroll error that delayed overtime for 3 part-timers who couldn't absorb the delay. Then he told them about Sarah without names and without drama. Her son needs an inhaler, he said. We sell those here. She rang up 5 today for customers who can afford them. She cannot buy one for her own child because our health plan has a deductible higher than last month's rent. The store manager swallowed. The regional director blinked rapidly and began taking notes. The assistant manager stared at his shoes. The CEO continued. We must become the kind of company that would make any one of us proud to put our mother in our smallest role. If we can't say that, then our success is accidental and our downfall inevitable. What followed was not a wave of magical change. It was work. The CEO knew promises are confetti until they become policy. He convened an emergency task group with HR, finance, and operations. They audited the schedule structure and found that rigid shifts were designed for convenience, not humanity. They retooled it into a system that guaranteed stable hours while allowing employees to lock in 2 days, a week for non-negotiable responsibilities, childcare, classes, medical appointments. They created a hardship fund seeded with executive bonuses redirected for the year. No questions asked for needs under a set amount and rapid review for larger support. They negotiated with the health provider for subsidized inhalers and basic prescriptions at cost. They established a clear, quiet channel for reporting concerns that bypassed local gatekeepers, who might silence or retaliate. There was pushback. Finance warned of margin compression. Operations argued that staffing flexibility would suffer. A few middle managers, more loyal to their clipboards than their people, muttered about softness. The CEO listened and then asked a question. He would repeat so often it became a mantra. If this were your family, what would be fair? Silence is not always agreement, but this silence felt like conscience. They moved forward. While policy gears turned, he returned to the store with practical help. He met Sarah in the office next to the time clock. He didn't present himself as a savior. He offered himself as a fellow human being with resources. I heard about your son, he said. We've arranged a refill tonight and covered the balance at the clinic. Tomorrow you're off at 2 to go be with him. Your hours won't be cut. We're also adjusting your availability so your neighbor isn't your emergency plan anymore. He handed her a card with a number to the hardship fund and counseling services. Use these, he said. You don't owe anyone an explanation for taking care of your life. She tried to speak and couldn't. She finally managed. Why? He answered, because a company is just a promise that people make to one another. Somewhere along the way we forgot the to one another part. Challenges were not limited to Sarah. The store itself was a knot of unmet needs. The freezers needed maintenance, leading to spoiled goods and stress for the night crew trying to salvage product. The training program for new hires had turned into a stack of outdated binders, so mistakes were frequent and reprimands even more so. Customers in a hurry met employees with thin patience. Small frictions became big ones. The CEO gathered the team and invited voices that hadn't been invited before. The janitor who knew which tiles always collected grime because of a slight slope in the floor. The cashier who had mastered diffusing rude customers with humor. The stalker who had ideas for a better, overnight flow that would let him see his daughter before school. They talked. They argued. They laughed. They designed their own solutions. Ownership, he reminded them, was not a line on a cap table. It was a posture. One by one, problems were met with dignity and practical fixes. The freezer was repaired. The training was rebuilt into short, clear modules filmed on phones by the best workers in each role. Customer service microscripts turned confrontations into conversations. Schedules were posted farther in advance so parents could plan childcare. Payroll errors were corrected with a new two-step verification process, and when they did occur, a same-day debit card credit bridged the gap. The assistant manager apologized to Sarah, not because he'd been told to, but because he'd seen in her a version of his sister, trying to make her way through nursing school while raising twins. Culture had shifted from secrecy to candor, from endurance to care. As the weeks unfolded, the CEO returned often, no longer undercover but never announced. He'd arrive early, pour coffee into a paper cup, and ask whoever was near, what would make today better? People started answering. A rack was moved, a fan repositioned, a rule retired, a new idea tested by Friday. Tiny acts compounded into momentum. Sales ticked up. Shrinkage trended down because fewer people needed to steal when their lives weren't perpetually on edge. Turnover slowed because stability is the best perk in the world. A local paper did a story, calling the company surprisingly human. The CEO preferred the way Sarah put it when she told a friend, "They see us now. We're not just hands. We're hearts." The reason for her tears that first morning, the reason is shocking. As some headlines would later shout, wasn't a scandal in the tabloid sense. It was more terrible, it was ordinary. A sick boy, a pharmacy balance, a schedule that didn't bend, a workplace that didn't ask. The shock was how common it was, how easily ignored. That was the truth that shook the CEO. Not one dramatic failure, but 1,000 small indifferences that, stacked together, become cruelty. Months later, the CEO hosted a town hall for employees across the region. He began by telling the story of a customer who wasn't a customer and a cashier who couldn't stop crying at her register. He listed the challenges they had faced because stories become maps when you name the roads. Poverty that punishes illness, childcare deserts, rigid scheduling that confuses control for safety, managers untrained in listening, payroll systems that assume employees have savings, health plans calibrated to spreadsheets instead of lives, the corrosive myth that kindness is expensive and meanness is efficient. Then he named the resolutions, not as trophies but as commitments. Subsidized basics, flexible stability, training and empathy, accountability without humiliation, fast fixes for pay errors, and a direct aid fund that treated emergencies as the facts of human life, not moral failings. Afterward, Sarah stepped to the microphone. She was nervous, but her voice was steady. "I don't want to be the face of struggle," she said. "That day I wanted to disappear. But I'm grateful I was seen. My son is okay. I can breathe. I come to work and I'm not afraid of the clock anymore." She looked at the CEO. "Thank you for asking a question and staying long enough to hear the answer." The room applauded, not because a problem had been solved perfectly, but because a promise had been made and kept. We will not look away. The store thrived. So did the people. The assistant manager enrolled in a leadership course that began with a module called Courageous Listening. The teenager at self-checkout used the new scholarship pilot to start community college. The veteran at the deli got the hours he needed and began sleeping in a bed every night. The night stalker built the new overnight flow and named it The Sun's Coming, because ending a shift with the dawn felt like a small victory. Sarah trained as a front-end lead and became the person new hires found when they couldn't remember how to breathe under pressure. On a quiet afternoon, the CEO returned to Register 3. He set down a basket, tea, batteries, and yes, a jar of baby food out of habit. Sarah laughed. "You don't even have a baby." He grinned. "I have a company that's learning to feed people." She looked toward the front doors where sunlight poured in. "You know," she said, "the doors sound different now." He listened. They sighed open as always. But there was indeed a new music in them, the sound of a place that had chosen to be kinder on purpose. He paid and took his receipt. Before he left, he said the words that had become his personal contract. If this were my family, what would be fair? He paused. That's the question we'll keep asking. When we get it wrong, we'll ask it again. The moral is not complex. It's as simple as a mother's breath over a child's forehead at 2 a.m, listening for the rise and fall. Businesses exist because people do, and leadership is just love scaled into a system. The moment we forget that, we trade our souls for margins that will never be wide enough to hold our emptiness. The moment we remember, we become more than stores. We become shelters. We become whispers of kindness that grow loud enough to be heard over everything that hurts. If this story moved you even a little, tell us how below. Share your own moments of being seen, or the times you chose to see someone else. Your comments are lanterns for strangers walking in the dark. And please share, and subscribe to Whispers of Kindness so these true-to-life stories of empathy can keep traveling where they're needed most. Together we can build workplaces and neighborhoods where no one has to apologize for being human.